The watch wasn't the inheritance. It was the map. But standing in that lawyer's office on a gray Tuesday morning in Kamloops, with his brother's smirk cutting across the room like a blade, Gordon Hale had no way of knowing that yet. He was 64 years old. He had spent 31 of those years in uniform, 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Bosnia, a knee that ached every winter, and a hearing aid he still pretended he didn't need. He had buried his father 3 days ago, in the red clay soil outside their family home near Tobiano, and he had driven the 4 hours down to the city in his old Ford pickup, with Bear sleeping across the back seat. A 7-year-old German shepherd with a graying muzzle and the kind of eyes that saw straight through people. Because the lawyer had called and said the family needed to be present for the reading. He had not expected much. His father, Harold Hale, had been a quiet man, a farmer, a veteran himself, Korea 1952, though he rarely spoke of it. Harold had lived the last 18 years of his life in a modest house on 40 acres, growing alfalfa and renting out his lower fields, and as far as Gordon knew, there had never been any real money. Gordon had sent what he could over the years, groceries when he visited, a new water heater the winter before last. His brother Dylan had done nothing, hadn't visited in 6 years, hadn't called on Christmas, hadn't shown up for their mother's funeral, and yet here he was, sitting in the front chair with his wife Kara and her gold bracelets, looking like a man who already knew the ending. Gordon sat in the back with his jacket in his lap and said nothing. The lawyer's name was Hennessy. He was a compact, careful man in his 60s, glasses on a chain, a way of clearing his throat before every sentence that Gordon found oddly reassuring, like someone who meant every word enough to announce it first. Hennessy placed a single folder on the desk and opened it without ceremony. The house and the 40 acres went to Dylan. The truck went to Dylan. The equipment, the old John Deere, the irrigation lines, the storage shed, went to Dylan. Gordon sat very still and counted his breaths the way they'd taught him in the field hospital outside Kandahar when the noise got to be too much. Then Hennessy looked at him over the rim of his glasses and said, "And to my son Gordon, I leave the following, his grandfather's watch." Dylan didn't laugh out loud. He was smarter than that. But his wife made a small sound, a breath through the nose that was the next best thing. And Dylan reached over and touched her knee to stop her, which somehow made it worse. Hennessy reached into the folder and placed the watch on the desk. Gordon recognized it immediately, a Hamilton military watch from the 1940s, the kind issued to officers in the Second World War. The crystal was scratched. The leather strap had been replaced sometime in the 80s with a plain brown band that had cracked now at the buckle. His grandfather, Earl Hale, had worn it in France. His father had kept it in a shoebox in the closet for as long as Gordon could remember. He picked it up. It was lighter than he expected. "That's it?" Dylan said, not to Gordon, not really to anyone, just letting the words sit in the air. Gordon turned the watch over in his hand. On the back, there was an engraving he'd never noticed before, worn almost smooth, for the ones who stay when others leave. He didn't know what that meant. He put the watch in his breast pocket, buttoned it closed, and shook Hennessy's hand on the way out. Bear was waiting in the truck cab, nose against the window. When Gordon climbed in, the dog put his head immediately on Gordon's thigh and exhaled, a long, slow breath. And Gordon sat there for a while with one hand on the dog's back and looked at the parking lot and the street beyond it and the mountains past that. And he did not cry because he was 64 years old and he had buried enough things to know that grief had its own schedule and its own route. He drove home. He had a small house outside of Merritt, a rental, 2 bedrooms, a back porch that looked toward the Nicola River. He'd bought a piece of land on the edge of town years ago, with the intention of building something. But the land had sat empty, and the intention had grown complicated the way intentions do. He was retired from the military, working part-time as a safety instructor at the regional college, coaching junior cadets on Thursday evenings. He lived alone except for Bear, and the arrangement suited him. That night he put the watch on the kitchen table under the lamp and looked at it for a long time. His father had not been a sentimental man, and he had not been a careless one. Harold Hale did not do things without reason. He had given Dylan the house and the land and the truck, and Gordon could not pretend that didn't sting. But Harold had also given Gordon a watch that had survived the Normandy hedgerows, and had told him, through Hennessy's careful voice, through a document signed 3 months before his death, that the watch was his. There was a reason. Gordon turned it over again. The crystal was too scratched to read in certain lights. He held it at an angle toward the lamp, and something caught his eye. Not the engraving on the back, but something behind the engraving. A slight difference in the metal. He pressed his thumbnail against it. The back plate shifted. He set the watch down, got a butter knife from the drawer, and worked the edge of it around the back casing until it came loose. Inside, behind the movement, folded thin as paper and tucked flat against the back plate, was a note. Harold's handwriting, small and steady, the way Gordon remembered it from grocery lists pinned to the fridge. Gordon, the land matters more than the house ever did. Ask Hennessy about the second envelope. He has instructions. I'm sorry I didn't say this to your face. You deserve to hear it out loud. Dad. Gordon read it twice. Then he put the back plate on the watch, set it on the kitchen table, and sat there with his hands open in his lap, while Bear watched him from the doorway. He called Hennessy the next morning. The lawyer was not surprised. He had, he said, been waiting for the call. He had a second envelope, sealed and separately signed, with instructions that it was to be opened only upon Gordon's contact following the reading. He could drive out to Merritt if Gordon preferred, or Gordon was welcome at the office. Gordon said he would come to Kamloops. He made the drive the following Friday. Bear sat in the back again, chin on the window ledge, watching the Thompson River Valley rolled past. The day was clear and cold in the way that November in the interior is clear and cold. The light flat and bright, the hills brown gold, the air smelling of pine and something sharp underneath it. In Hennessy's office, the second envelope was heavier than the first. Inside was a document, a transfer of title, signed by Harold Hale, and witnessed and notarized 4 years earlier. The property in question was not the 40 acres near Tobiano. It was a separate parcel, 220 acres in the hills east of Merritt, half of it timbered, half of it open pasture, with a creek running through the lower section and a decommissioned forestry road leading in from the main highway. Along with the title was a statement from the Bank of Montreal. The account had been in Harold's name, jointly transferred to Gordon at the time of the title registration 4 years ago. Gordon had not known the account existed. He had not been told. The balance, as of the previous month, was $417,000. Gordon sat with the papers in his hands and did not say anything for a long time. Hennessy cleared his throat. "Your father began acquiring that land 15 years ago," he said. "He sold the mineral rights on the north section to a resource company in 2019. He kept the payments. He never touched the principal." He paused. "He told me, when we prepared these documents, that he wanted you to have something that couldn't be contested, something that was already yours before he died." Gordon looked at the title. 220 acres, and Dylan doesn't know, Gordon said. It wasn't a question. The estate disclosed only what was part of the estate, Hennessy said carefully. The transfer occurred 4 years ago. Your brother received everything that remained in your father's name at the time of death. This had not been in your father's name for 4 years. Gordon nodded once and folded the papers back into the envelope. Bear was at his feet. He'd been allowed in because Hennessy, it turned out, had a dog of his own, a spaniel who watched from a cushion in the corner. Gordon reached down and put his hand on Bear's shoulder, and the dog leaned into it without turning his head. Just adjusted his weight toward Gordon the way dogs do when they know something before you do. It was mid-afternoon when Gordon drove back through the hills. He pulled off the main road at a gas station just outside Merritt and sat in the parking lot for a while. The mountains were going pink in the west. A transport truck rumbled past on the highway. Normal, ordinary life, going about its business. He had not thought about what to do with land. He had not thought about what to do with money. He had spent 31 years being told where to be, and what to do, and how to do it. And then he had spent the years since trying to figure out what he actually wanted, which had turned out to be harder work than anything the army had asked of him. He opened the glove compartment and took out a folded piece of paper he'd been carrying around for 2 months. It was a printout from a website, a program in Alberta that helped veterans establish therapeutic working dog partnerships, matching retired service animals with veterans dealing with PTSD and traumatic injury. He'd come across it when he was helping one of his cadets look into service dog programs for a class project. He'd folded the page and put it in the glove compartment, and tried not to think about why. He thought about it now. 220 acres. He called his friend Lou Deschamps that evening. Lou had been his sergeant in Kandahar, and had come home with a leg that worked mostly and a left hand that didn't. Lou was living in Kamloops now, doing carpentry work when he could, and spending the rest of his time managing a kind of informal support group out of a church basement. Veterans, mostly, and their families, meeting on Wednesday nights to talk about whatever needed talking about. Gordon went when he could. He'd brought Bear to the meetings twice, and both times something had shifted in the room. Men who hadn't said a full sentence in 20 minutes started talking when Bear walked over and put his head in their lap. "I have land," Gordon told him. There was a pause. "Okay," Lou said. 220 acres. Outside Merritt. Creek on the lower half, Old Forestry Road in. Another pause. "Gordon, I know. You thinking what I think you're thinking." Gordon looked out the kitchen window at the dark. "I don't know what I'm thinking yet. I wanted to say it out loud to somebody." "Say it," Lou said. Gordon looked at Bear, who was lying by the back door, watching him. "I think I want to build something," Gordon said. He spent the winter doing what he always did when he was working through a problem. Slowly, methodically, without rushing anything. He drove out to the land twice and walked it with Bear in the snow, the dog bounding ahead through the drifts and then doubling back, checking on him the way Bear always did, a habit left over from Gordon's worst year, 3 years ago, when he had barely left the house for 4 months, and Bear had stayed pressed against his leg through most of it. He talked to an architect in Merritt, a retired veteran himself, a man named Dennis, who had come home from Petawawa with a back injury and a talent for spatial reasoning. Gordon showed him the land, the creek, the southern exposure. Dennis walked it in silence and then stood at the top of the ridge and said, "You could put 6 cabins here and not crowd them. 7 if you're willing to take down those 2 spruce on the east side." Gordon said, 7. He met with a nonprofit lawyer in Kelowna who had helped set up similar programs in the Okanagan. He registered a society under the BC Societies Act and named it after his grandfather, the Harold Hale Foundation. He called the Alberta program and talked to their director for 2 hours about what worked and what didn't, about which breeds had the best placement outcomes, about training protocols, about how to build something that would last. He applied for a provincial grant and got half of what he asked for, which the grant coordinator told him was actually quite good for a first application. Dylan called in February. He had heard, through some channel Gordon couldn't trace and didn't particularly care about, that Gordon had come into money. The call was the first time in 8 months they had spoken. Dylan's voice had that particular texture it got when he was working towards something. Smooth in the wrong places, like a floorboard that had been sanded over a soft spot. "I've been thinking," Dylan said, "about Dad's wishes. I think he would have wanted us to manage his legacy together, as a family." Gordon said, "Dad didn't leave us anything together. That land you're holding, it was always meant to be part of the farm. He just didn't get around to incorporating it properly." Gordon looked out the window. There was a family of chickadees working through the lilac bush by the fence, small and intent and utterly indifferent to the cold. "Dylan," he said, Dad had 4 years to incorporate anything he wanted to. He didn't. I'm just saying we should talk to a lawyer together. I have a lawyer, Gordon said. Thanks for calling. And he hung up. He told Lou about it that Wednesday. Lou said, he's going to come at you again. I know, Gordon said. What are you going to do? Build faster, Gordon said. Construction started in April. Dennis oversaw the build with 2 crews, one local, one that Lou had pulled together from veterans looking for skilled trade hours as part of their transition programs. They broke ground on a Thursday, and by the following month had the foundations poured for 4 of the 7 cabins. Gordon was on site most days, not directing, just present, getting coffee, carrying lumber when an extra set of hands was useful, letting Bear run the perimeter in the evenings when the crews had gone home. There was a moment in May, a Tuesday late afternoon, when Gordon was sitting on a stack of timber at the edge of the ridge, watching Bear work the creek bank below, nose down, tail steady, moving with that particular focused calm the dog had. And the sun was cutting through the tree line at exactly the angle that made the whole valley go gold, and Gordon sat there and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness, exactly. Quieter than that. More like the feeling you get when a door closes behind you that you'd been dreading walking through for years, and you realize, standing on the other side, that it wasn't as bad as you thought, and also that you're somewhere new now, and the new place might be good. Bear looked up from the creek and found him, held the look for a moment, then went back to the water. Dylan moved through a lawyer in May. The letter came certified mail, and Gordon's lawyer called him before he'd even opened it. The claim was what Gordon had expected. An argument that the land transfer had been made under undue influence, that Harold Hale had been manipulated by Gordon in the years before his death, that the transfer should be contested as part of the estate. Gordon's lawyer, a woman named Patricia Arnault, who had handled land disputes in the BC interior for 22 years, read the letter over the phone and then said, with no particular emotion, "They have nothing. Your father transferred this property at age 79, with full legal capacity, with his own lawyer present 4 years before his death. There is no documentation of any undue influence because there was none. We will respond formally, and this will be dismissed." She paused. "Do you want me to explain to your brother's lawyer what the legal costs of pursuing this will look like?" "Yes," Gordon said. Dylan's lawyer wrote back once more in July with a softened version of the same argument. Patricia responded in 3 paragraphs. After that, nothing. The Earl Hale Foundation held its first intake in September. 6 veterans arrived on a Friday afternoon. 3 from BC, 2 from Alberta, 1 from New Brunswick, who had driven across the country in his own truck because someone in his support group had told him about the program, and he had decided it was worth the trip. Their service animals came with them. 2 German shepherds, a Labrador, a border collie, and 2 mixed breeds from the same rescue in Abbotsford that had been training working dogs for veterans for 7 years. Lou had driven up from Kamloops the night before and slept in one of the finished cabins and was drinking coffee on the porch when the first truck pulled in. Gordon stood in the yard with Bear at his side. Bear, who had been formally assessed and certified the previous spring, who had been Gordon's own unacknowledged service dog for 3 years, before Gordon admitted that's what he was. The man from New Brunswick climbed out of his truck and stood there for a moment, looking at the ridge, the cabins, the creek glinting at the bottom of the hill. He had a black Labrador on a leash, who sat the moment they stopped walking and leaned against the man's leg. "This is it?" the man said. "This is it," Gordon said. The man looked at him for a moment. "I wasn't sure it would be real." Gordon nodded. He understood that. He'd had the same feeling, standing in Hennessy's office with the title in his hands, the sense that something real might be happening, and the learned reflex to wait for it to turn out otherwise. "It's real," Gordon said. "Come on inside." That evening after dinner, after the in-the-program overview and the tour of the property, they sat on the large deck that Dennis had built to face southwest, into the sunset. 6 veterans, Lou, Gordon, and the dogs lying in various arrangements around the chairs. Bear pressed against Gordon's leg. The Labrador from New Brunswick sprawled across the bottom step, the border collie restless at the edge of the deck before finally settling. Someone asked Gordon how it had started. He told the short version: his father's will, the watch, the note behind the backplate, the land that had been his without his knowing. A watch, one of the men said. An old Hamilton. My grandfather brought it home from France. And that's how you found out. That's how. There was a silence, not uncomfortable. The kind that settles over people who have all spent time in places where silence meant something. The sunset was doing something extraordinary to the hills, turning them the color of old brass. What does it say? Someone asked. On the back. Gordon thought for a moment. He still carried the watch. He'd had the strap replaced and the crystal polished, though he'd left the engraving exactly as it was. He took it out of his pocket and read it. For the ones who stay when others leave. No one said anything for a while after that. They didn't need to. Some things land in the body before they land in the mind. And this was one of them. Men who had all, in various ways and for various reasons, stayed when the world had given them every reason to go. Bear shifted against Gordon's leg and exhaled the way he did. That long, slow breath, like letting something go. Gordon put the watch back in his breast pocket and buttoned it closed. The creek was running in the dark below the ridge. Somewhere in the tree line an owl called once, and then went quiet. The last of the light was leaving the hills, and the first stars were coming in over the mountains. And the Harold Hale Foundation had been open for exactly 1 day. And Gordon Hale sat in the chair his grandfather's watch had built and looked at the sky, and thought that his father, quiet man that he was, had known exactly what he was doing all along.